This is the 5th video in the face drawing series, and it will focus on how to draw a mouth. So before I draw, I always want to check my math. So remember that the bottom of the mouth should be halfway from the bottom of the nose to the chin. Yep, got that in the right place. And then we know the width of the mouth, halfway across the eye. Yep, and the other thing I just want to check, do I have this centered? So I'm going to take my symmetry line and slide over from one side to the other. Ooh, nope, I don't have them exactly the same size. So always important to check the math before you start your drawing. So now I know from here to here is the same as from here to here. Okay, so I know what the width of the mouth is, but we need to determine the height. This is exactly the same thing we did with eyes. So I'm going to bring in Jennifer Aniston, and we will figure out the math using her mouth. So we already know what the width is. You always start with the known factor. So that is the width of the mouth. And then now I'm going to turn the piece of paper and figure out what the height is. So from here to the top of the mouth is right there. We have that width. Okay, so now we're just going to mathematically figure out what that proportion is. So I'm going to fold my piece of paper, zoom in here, and that shows me where the half is right here. By folding the piece of paper again, that will give me a quarter. Oh, now we're close. So you notice that it's just a little under a quarter, so that's the measurement that we'll use. So I'm going to take the exact same process and apply it to the drawing. So this is the width. We know that this is half. You can just fold a piece of paper. That's a quarter right there. And ours is just slightly smaller than a quarter. So it's going to be from here to here. And remember, this line is the bottom of the mouth, not the middle. So you've got to take that measurement and go above the mouth right there. Okay, and at that point, I will use my piece of paper, align the edges, make sure my blocking line is nice and horizontal. So the other thing that we need to look at is the upper lip the same as the bottom lip? And this changes from person to person. Just looking at her mouth, you can tell that the widest part from here to here is the same as the widest part from here. So we can go ahead and put another horizontal line across the middle. Okay, and now we are set up. All our math is done, and we can start by putting in the shape. So as usual, I'm just going to go in and lighten all those blocking lines. So I can barely see them. Okay. So the top of the mouth always has this U or V shape in it because there's a valley right here called the phildrum, this part under your nose. So some people will have a very sharp V, some people will have a little bit of a U. Because she's smiling, this is stretched out a bit more so that it ends up being a really flat kind of U shape. So I'm going to go ahead and center that, just bring a shape right here. And then that brings us to the highest part of the lips, and then go back down into the corner. So when it comes to placement on the face, they're fairly standard, but when it comes to shapes, it really changes from one person to the next. When doing the bottom of the mouth, you can pretty much go flat across the middle and then go back up to the corners. And when you look at it, you can kind of tell mine isn't symmetrical. So as always, I'm just going to turn it upside down, and it makes it much easier for me to see. Are my two halves the same? Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is this straight line going across the middle. There are really no straight lines in nature, and even if it looks straight, you as an artist need to slightly change that to make it look less fake. So what we're going to do is take this line and basically do the same thing we did at the top, just not so much. So where this dents out, we're just going to dent down a little bit. And where this puffs up, we're just going to make this line go up a little bit. It's a very subtle thing, but it makes a big difference. It starts to create much more contouring. So once you have the shape, again, get rid of any outlines, get rid of any blocking lines. Even all these dark lines that I just drew, I do not want outlines. Outlines make things look flat. They make things look cartoony. We're going for high realism in our shading. Okay, so I'm just going to bring in a scrap piece of paper for a moment. So we have the basic shape of the mouth, and we need to start shading it. So as usual, you shade in the direction of the object. And with mouths, if you remember winter when they get chapped, that the texture of the mouths goes straight up and down. But if you start to shade straight up and down, then you're just going to make them look flat. So we need to use contouring to help convince the viewer that they're three-dimensional, not two-dimensional. So starting in the middle, I'm going to go kind of straight up and down, but then I'm going to start curving a little bit this way until I get to this tall part, and then here we go. On the outside, I'm going to start curving like this, and that's going to start bending it. The more you curve your lines when you shade, the puffier the lips look. So I'm going to go again here until I get to the highest part, then I'm going to turn around and start going this way. And we get that effect. And then same thing on the bottom. In the middle, you can kind of start going straight up and down, and then we want to start to curve. And the more we curve, the more three-dimensional, puffier the mouth will look. So we get that kind of effect. You can see the difference between these two, how we're going to start to get three-dimensional. Right. So I'm going to, again, if you feel confident, go ahead and start with a pencil. If you're kind of scared, you can go ahead and just start with a smudgy. So starting in the middle, I'm doing this really light. I'm going to start curving until I get to this high part, and then I'll turn it around. Start getting my shading out here. Same on this side. So I haven't curved it quite as much as I just did on the scrap piece of paper, so that they're not quite as puffy. And same thing on the bottom, we want to start to bend a bit. Missed my corners. I'm just going to go back and get my corners a little bit. Okay, so the issue, of course, right now is it looks like she's got furry lips. So I need to go back in, take the smudgy, and I'm just going to soften that. I also need to fill the space between those lines. So I'm not completely getting rid of the texture. We don't want the lips to look chapped. We just want to indicate a bit of texture to differentiate the fact that they're not the same as the skin around them. And if you smudge it too much, you might have to go back in and kind of fix it a little bit. But that's where we've just begun the shading part of it, so there's still more to come. Okay, so the other thing that we need to do is we need to go back into the center line. And here's a really great trick. Whenever you're shading something, so we need to go back and darken that line. Instead of doing this, instead of doing a solid line, a really great trick for creating realism is to never have a solid line like that. And to do things like this, start in with a darker line, let it lighten, then darken it kind of again, let it light, darken it again. It's a big difference. This looks cartoony, that looks realistic. Having your lines go from thin to thick, light to dark, make a big difference. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead in the middle. I'm going to darken it here. Then I'm just going to let it get light at this part, kind of where the puffy is. And then going back to the corners, I can darken a fair bit. That looks a bit better. And again, I'm just going to go and soften. So the other thing that we need to do is we need to get those lips even more three-dimensional. So if I was to draw the side view, we have the upper lip coming in like this. We've got the lower lip like this. Well, that's a cylinder, so it must be darker on the bottom here. And depending on how puffy it is, we need to get a little bit darker on the bottom there. So between your pencil, your smudgy, you just need to go back in and darken the bottom of that upper lip especially. I'm shading pretty quickly because it's a middle of a lesson, but usually I would really slow down and spend a long time to get this shading to look really good. So you can see the difference already. The upper lip has now started to come out from the page. It's looking more three-dimensional. And I'm just going to do that little bit of the same thing on the bottom. Not too much. And never leaving the edge of my shading. So I'm always going to take that new shadow and I'm going to blend it into the rest of it so that you're never suddenly stopping. That's how you get things to look realistic. So even here, that's looking a little like a line right there. That's looking kind of fake. So I'm going to go back in and soften that edge a bit more. And let's pull back out. And that's the basics of drawing and then shading the mouth.